do that.
Are you on now? Or are you?
Not yet.
Okay.
On your.
Okay, it's recording now. And I'm about to go live. People get mad when you're like not on time. They get really pissy. They're like, you're 5 minutes late.
Ooh.
This one's epic.
Come on, Epic.
Epic.
Oh, come on.
I hope my wife and kids are behind me. I've told them to stay outside.
Just waiting for it. I normally use another stream system, but
Cool.
You muted, Terence.
So.
I muted. Okay. Yes, I think we're live. It looks like we are live. Say hey, everybody. Y'all all quiet.
Hi.
Hey. I'm waiting on you, girl.
Where it is. Okay.
We're ready.
Ow.
All right, I'm gonna share it to my fan page. Real quick. And
Share to my timeline.
I'm scared to press any buttons.
oh, are you scared of pressing buttons? It's like, no. Hey, everybody on Facebook, thank you for joining us on this roundtable with Mr. Terence Blanchard, who's been here before to Conversations. You set it off.
Oh.
Yeah. Set it off before in its early inception.
It was great. We had a lot of fun.
Yeah, we blew up from there.
You blew up from there.
You know, family.
I've been watching. I've been seeing what's happening.
We've been doing some things.
That's been good.
So my jam in June has come to an end, and we have had some amazing composers / friends of mine. Ricky Ian Gordon, who was incredible. He read poetry. We booked a recital for the future. Jake Hagee, who was incredible, of course. Anthony Davis. I mean,
Wow.
I could have kept talking to him for another.
I bet.
Yeah. Kamala Sankaram, who's a fantastic young Indian American composer. It's just been amazing. I mean, the whole series was born out of wanting Terence to come back on, and then me trying to find a place for Jake, because originally Jake, I think, was like number 4 or something, and I kept bumping him for singers. I kept bumping him like, no, I'm gonna put him here, and then I was like, okay, I'm gonna do a whole series. And when I was trying to figure out how I was gonna bring Terence back, I texted you, Terence, and I was like, what you think about this, doing a roundtable? And you're like, I'll be there, let's do it. And so I called Damien and was like, all right, I'm doing this thing. And actually, it was Dave and Damien both were like, hook me up with Terence. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to introduce you to him, but it's going to be under the guise of your composing and not being my friend. And so and then I thought about who else I would want. And, I'm about to do one of Joel's pieces in the fall, and Shawn's been killing it. And, with all of the amazing things he's been doing. And I met Jessie a few months ago. She came to my recital that I did in Jersey, and she's just soaring. And Nailah, I did her piece 1.5 years ago. And then Jasmine, I've been like wanting to work with her. I think I had called you, I was doing a recital, and I called you, I was like, do you have, things that we're gonna work together at the end of the year? So I am just so grateful to you all for coming on my platform, and I'm excited. So I don't have any notes because I don't have my glasses, and we can But I just want y'all to go and free flow
Mhm.
and just share with us and share with each other.
Mhm.
And
Well, no, well, thank you for having us. It's been a great, beautiful journey watching you blossom in this new reality that we're living in right now. And God bless you for giving us ideas to think about and giving singers and composers a forum to express themselves. You know what I mean? Because you took up the mantle and you've been doing it in a beautiful way. So we got to say thank you for that. And then to put this together, giving this composers roundtable express themselves. You know what I mean?
somebody
Took up the mantle and you've been doing it in a beautiful way.
turn their volume down.
And then to put this together, giving this composers roundtable express themselves. You know what I mean? Up the mantle.
I think it's an echo from Facebook. So if somebody has it like on their phone, then.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But it's been great though. It's been great. And to put this together with all of these great composers here. If it wasn't for you, nobody would have done this. So you know what I mean? So we got to thank you for doing that. And I feel blessed to meet all of these great talented people who I hadn't had the pleasure of meeting before, but hopefully, you know, we'll start new relationships after this particular roundtable.
That's what's up.
Yeah.
That's what's up. So y'all want to go around and just talk a little bit about where you're from?
I got a question.
Go ahead.
I got a question.
Get out of the way.
Has she bothered y'all the way she bothers me?
No.
Where's my music?
Only Damien right now.
I literally just emailed her a score from I don't even know how long ago. But you got it now, so.
Well, Shawn, you want to talk about where a little bit about yourself and where you're from?
My first. Well, I'm Shawn Okpebholo. Tomorrow I'll officially be full professor of composition and theory at Wheaton College Conservatory.
Oh.
So I'm super excited about that. So that's outside of Chicago, and I'm mainly a composer. I'm a professor of theory also, and I mean, I love this. I have a wife who's a professional violist and 2 kids, 2 daughters, and we're just having a good time quarantine, making music, being creative, cooking, eating a lot of food, and I'm writing. So, but this is very inspiring. I was just saying how, because of recent events, a lot of us are getting approached more, you know, which is rightly so. But the big takeaway is that, you know, there's lots of us. You know, I mean, lots of composers out there who are doing their thing, Black composers. So I really hope that the world sees this. I mean, we're just a microcosm of what's out there, you know. So thanks for having me.
Welcome. Who's next?
Am I next?
Yes.
All right, cool. I'm Damien. I currently live in Portland, Oregon, although I'm from Virginia originally. I'm about 50% singer, 50% composer, although the time that we're living in now, I'm like 100% composer.
Right.
And I'm not mad at that. So I'm very grateful to have this to do while we're in this kind of interesting time. And yeah, I'm very proud to be a part of this group. And thank you, Karen, for putting it all together.
You're welcome. Damien is a phenomenal bass baritone. Like, he could go either way, full opera, international career. But when he told me we were a writer, I was like, what? All that voice and you can write, you know? So, Dave.
Hey everybody. All right, I am Dave Ragland. Good to see everybody. So I'm originally from Chattanooga, Tennessee. Born and raised there. Went to Tennessee State University. I love my HBCU for undergrad, and then went to UTC, PWI for grad school. I got an MBA. Actually MBA in marketing, and I had a whole career in accounting of all things. Yeah. While I was trying to study music and get a second degree at TSU for music, and I got that. And the accounting career ended and music just kind of began to take off. And yeah, so I think my kind of situation into was arranging, a lot of choral arranging, believe it or not, choral arranging for spirituals. I was in the Showstoppers, the chamber chorale at TSU, and Diana Poe, she just kind of, put me into that. And it's just, you know, been in my ear ever since. So I've been arranging, you know, spirituals. That's kind of my calling card. Then, you know, the art songs, you know, with, you know, Daryl Taylor. And now I got some, you know, some bigger projects, some bigger coin coming in. So I want
That's
All right, Dave. Yes. Congratulations. Jazzy.
Hey, you guys. So I'm Jasmine. I was born in Baltimore, but I live in Dallas, Texas now. I primarily am a vocalist. So I'm like you, Damien, as far as being half and half, but I'm also an educator. I teach at Booker T. Washington High School for the Performing and Visual Arts here in Dallas, Texas, and I'm the head of composition and jazz voice, literally a split title. So I literally love anything music related. It does anything art related, I'll say. It kind of doesn't matter to me. I like to draw. I like to, you know, do a lot of different things. I'm just really grateful to have been welcomed within my own community, especially making the transition from, okay, am I a singer full time or am I a composer full time? And it's like, do both, but figure it out. Okay.
Yeah,
And
let's talk about that.
yes, we definitely have to, for sure. And then especially on top of that, being a teacher at a high school, Jesus, it's there. Okay. But yeah, I'm just really grateful to be here, and we'll talk.
Whoever's next, go for it.
Hi, I'm Nailah, and I'm from New York, from Harlem. I'm still in Harlem now. And I'm a pianist composer. I also teach music as well. And I'm into sound design. I also enjoy that. And I thank you, Karen, for bringing me on and working with you. I mean, it was really amazing to work with you. So I thank you for that.
You're welcome. We have to do it again because we killed that piece. You killed that piece, man. She did the Nobody Knows about the Me Too young Black girls.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's fantastic. The piece she wrote. Gosh, yeah. Jessie or Joel.
Oh.
JJ.
I guess I'll go then. I'm Joel Thompson. I am a composer, I suppose. I started out as a pianist in undergrad and then did a master's in choral conducting, and I taught for 4 years at a 2-year college and at a high school. And Seven Last Words of the Unarmed, one of my pieces, started taking off, and I decided to switch to composition full-time. And now I'm a student at the Yale School of Music. I'm starting my DMA in the fall.
good.
Yeah.
And you don't sing with that voice, man?
I am a choral singer.
I was about to say.
I do sing, provide the low notes for lots of choruses, I suppose.
Right.
Yeah.
Miss Jessie.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jessie Montgomery. I'm also from New York, like Nailah, also born and raised. And I'm in New York right now also. And, you know, I've been writing as best I can. I didn't write for 2 months when this thing started, and have been since changed a lot of the way that I think about my work and how to say what I want to say, and, you know, taking risks, different kinds. They're not even risks, but just doing things a little bit differently than I would normally, in terms of how I approach putting music on the page in general. Been recording myself a lot more, things like that, and using, you know, layering things differently than I normally would. We can, as we talk nerdy composition stuff, if we get into that, we can talk through that. Maybe not for the wider audience, I don't know, but in any case, yeah, this is what a treat to be in this virtual room with such a rich group of people, and wow, thank you, Karen. Yeah.
You're welcome. Thank you. TB.
Well, I have a question, man, just for everybody, because, you know, my students always ask me about this, and I feel blessed because the way my trajectory has gone from the performing world into the writing world. But how do you generate work? You know, how do you stay busy? What's the process for a lot of you guys?
Well, I would say that for me, something that I learned from one of my best friends and, you know, my line brother in Find Me Alpha is like, he says, like, Dave, you know, if the work doesn't come, if you can't find the work, then create it.
Mm-hmm.
For me, most of my pieces, ironically, are written before somebody even asked for them. Like a lot of stuff, like the Calvary was written, you know, before, you know, it took off. You know, I Believe, you know, my hit or whatever was written 2 years before it took off. So it's like, for me, it's just a matter of, you know, if the work isn't coming in, just, you know, creating it and it'll come.
Mm-hmm.
Also joining organizations, joining like networks, meeting people. That's how I manage to get things. Meeting people, forming relationships, you know, that's how I do it.
Mm.
For me, sometimes I take those moments when I don't have as much going on and I really write the thing that I really, really want to write. That's not under the guise of any kind of commission or anything like that. And actually, a couple of times that has happened, they ended up being commissions because I said to somebody, oh yeah, by the way, I wrote blah, blah, blah. And they're like, oh yeah, we want to commission you to do it. So yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, fortunately, since graduate school, I've always written for an organization or ensemble or a solo artist. And so that's how my compositions have been motivated. And the more your music's out there and performed, the more people will contact you to write things. Some things you're more excited about than others. The least, if you're not that excited about it, what you do, you charge more. But if you're really excited about it, you know, you want to just write, right? So yeah, that's my process. It gets kind of stressful sometimes though, because you want to write good music. Just because someone asks you, or just because someone commissions you to write something, your name is on there, right? And so the older I get, and I'm realizing I can't just write. I have to like make sure what I'm writing is worth being out there.
You know, kind of to respond to that a little bit, I suffer with something that some people will call imposter syndrome, where I'll write something and feel as though I'm not worthy to have this performed or that it's not good enough to put out to the public. And most of the time when I feel like, oh, I have writer's block per se, is usually really just imposter syndrome, like rearing its ugly head and kind of like saying, okay, well, you need to go back to the drawing board and rethink this, try again. Or don't do it right now, just come back later, you know? And for me, balancing between being an educator and being a composer and being a performer, sometimes I'll get to a place where I'm like not writing for like 2 months or something like that. And it's terrible because I'll be teaching it. I'll be teaching writing and then be like, but I don't feel, I'm drained of my creativity to be able to create something right now. But anyways, back to my process though, I try to tap into things that were my experience just growing up in general. Like my grandmother to me is the first composer I ever heard because she would sit in church and harmonize. She's a woman that doesn't sing the melody, okay? She never sings the melody, okay? You know, in church, somebody might sing, I'll draw men unto me, but she'll do, I'll draw men unto me, right? You know what I mean? So taking those experiences and saying, okay, this is still worthy of being called creation. This is still worthy of being valid and being important and something that somebody wants to hear. And even if they don't want to hear it, child, listen. Okay. So, that's how I feel.
You know, I love what you said about the part about feeling like you don't know what you're doing, you know, because I was just on the phone yesterday with another composer friend of mine. He's a film composer. And we were just talking about that. We were just talking about how whenever you start a project, there's this level of anxiety of like, man, you know, do I really have the goods for this? You know what I mean? Yeah. And the thing that I've learned to do is to try to go on faith. You know what I mean? And my composition teacher, Roger Dickinson, he always used to tell me, he said, trust your training. You know what I mean? So I have to believe that everything that I've learned is still sitting there someplace, but I just try to get started. you know, and I don't know where that is. I don't know if that's the ending, the middle, or the beginning, you know, but I think the rest of it, for me at least, is problem solving, you know, because once you get started, then all of a sudden a bunch of scenarios will pop up, you know, and that's the beautiful part about it. I think the thing that's going to be great about us having this roundtable, I've done one of these with film composers, and I'm telling you, they're like therapy sessions,
Right.
you know, because we all sit in a room, people don't realize we all sit in a room by ourselves.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And, you know, I'm living in another house now where my studio is over the garage, but in one of my other homes, you would have to walk by my studio, my kids, man, and they would run by the door, you know, because as soon as they would walk by, like, hey, come in here, come here. You know, tell me what you think about this. Listen to this. And they go, and I'm like, no, because you want to have some feedback from somebody, from other people. But I love the fact that you're Jasmine, that you're vulnerable enough to admit and talk openly about your fears, because I firmly believe that's a part of the process. You know, because I've talked to some very successful film composers, man, and they say the exact same thing. And trust me, when we performed my opera for the first one, and each one, you know, I'm sitting in the room by myself, but that first day of sitting down with the singers to have them go through the lines is torture.
Mm-hmm.
It's torture, because you just want to make sure that everything is working the way it should. And you know, there was a certain soprano who claimed that I was killing her with a whole bunch of high A's. So I had to go back in and
I wonder who.
You know what? I actually skip first rehearsals. I never go to a first rehearsal. I'll let your performers, you know, deal with it.
well, they do that. I come in like a couple of weeks later.
Okay, good. One thing though, I want to say what Jasmine said too that I really resonate with. There are composers who can just compose music for music's sake. I cannot do that, and I envy you so much that those who can do that. But for me, like Jasmine, all my pieces are either rooted in something, inspired by something, a response to something, or about something. Whether it's poetry or whether it's some sort of current event or some personal thing that's going on. But I really admire people who can just write music just to write music, because that is not me.
Well, Dave, when you were talking about it, you sparked something that I thought about, because one of my trumpet colleagues, man, Ambrose Akamusri, is a great jazz trumpet player, man, and he was talking about, you know, having a burning desire to say something. And it seems as though, like when you talk about writing pieces that you've already just had in the can, that there's maybe something in you that just needs to speak. Is that the case? Dave?
Oh yeah. Oh, I was meditating. I was like, oh, that was deep. That was deep. Well, I mean, it's just, you know, I don't feel like I'm Kung Fu Panda or nothing like that, but it's like, you know, the secret. That's one of my favorite movies too, Kung Fu Panda. Like the secret is in us. You know, the secret is, you know, the secret ingredient is in us, already there. You know, color purple, God is, you know, inside of me like everyone else and whoever will be. It's just a matter of just, you know, letting it out. You know, it's a matter of providence. If you write it, you know, God's not going to put something in you and you do it and it's not, you know, his word's going to come to pass. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, so I'm churchy too, in case you don't know. That's why I got this old school piano back here. So if you hear a couple of chords, you don't know why. But yeah, it's just a matter of providence. If you write it, you know, God's gonna see it through. I believe that.
Right, I do too.
Yeah. What about Jessie and Joel? They are awfully quiet over there.
Yep. I was gonna get to Jessie because I love the way she started.
Yeah, no, I completely relate to what you're saying, Jasmine, for sure. I just also had like a weird electricity thing happen in my house, so my internet's okay. Everybody can hear me fine. Everything's okay. All right. Okay. Yeah. No, I completely relate to what you're saying in terms of that feeling of like that when you're stuck. That actually what's happening is that it's not about like, is the material there or is the material good? It's your judgment of it that gets in the way of I struggle with that a lot. You know, especially when it comes to commissioned work. I mean, I'm, you know, as grateful as I am for those opportunities, the sort of structure of them and the deadlines and the, you know, the powers that be that you're sort of working with and against sometimes, you know, makes it a challenge to sort of always find your true path through, you know, because not every piece is necessarily meant to have maybe that deadline that's on it, you know, in terms of what it is that you're trying to discover. And so I just, you know, I've recently, that's what I, you know, about talking about sort of how things have changed and, you know, sort of readapting how I write. It's been a lot of more about allowing, because things have opened up a little bit timing wise, I can actually go through that process a little bit more honestly, more freely, to explore, like, to just let that discovery take its time to unfold. I feel like that's something that I haven't given myself the time for. You know, yes, before pandemic, everyone was running around crazy on planes and trains and automobiles and playing gigs and stuff like that. It's always easy to say, oh, those parameters were what, you know, what causes, that they somehow cause barriers to your creativity. I think it's true, but it also was part of the noise, you know? There's a lot of noise that's now been quieted that I'm finding. It's like scary, but it's exciting because I'm discovering some new things. I'm not even discovering anything new. I feel like I'm just letting, like you said, who was just saying you have to let it come through. I'm finally letting what needs to come through, and I'll plop it in where I need to plop it in as the deadlines reappear. But yeah.
Yeah, I definitely relate to all that everyone has said. I too feel as if I sometimes don't know what I'm doing. I think part of it is there's a lot of energy that I have to expend to stop looking at myself as a composer as I do as a Black man in a white world, in that when you're navigating white spaces, you're constantly aware of what everyone else is thinking about you and how you are existing in that space. And that same mindset tends to infiltrate my compositional mindset. And I'm constantly thinking about what, you know, XYZ would think about what I'm writing. And it ends up creating a dam that doesn't let a lot past it. And so a lot of energy, especially as the world gets increasingly on fire, is spent trying to demolish that dam and try and be as honest and vulnerable as possible. But that's very scary. Even though it's only taking place in the compositional mind, it's very scary to take your mask off, in the Dunbarian sense, I suppose, take your mask off in public, I suppose. And so, yeah, I totally relate to all of that, and curious to see if anyone else has a similar experience.
You know, the thing about what you just, the thing about what you just said is, I think a lot of us are afraid to pull the mask off because we don't see us being successful to that level, you know, where we have the models in front of us, you know. And for me, it was, and I'm not saying this because she's my sister, but it was Karen Slack, it was Arthur Woodley sitting down talking to me, having long conversations about where they come from in the church and how entering into this world, you know, you have to abandon that to aspire to another aesthetic, whereas that what you come from has a lot of power and a lot of passion within it. And having the conversations with them, man, just it freed me in a way to not really give a damn. You know what I mean? So you you get to the point where, and for me, I have the luxury of having another career where if I fail, I can just say, well, that was just that, and I'm going back over to this. You know what I'm saying? So I had a fallback plan. So I understand that. But it was having those, and I can remember those conversations in my home that we had about these issues. And because I kept telling them thank you, because dude, they were elevating me to a whole nother place just because of the way they were singing these lines, you know. And then they were telling me thank you because I was giving them a piece of art that allowed them to bring who they've always been to the table. So I understand what you're saying about that fear, because I've had it. A lot of people don't know this, but when my first opera was done for Opera Theater St. Louis, it was supposed to be premiered in 2012. I was so scared to death, we had to reschedule it for 2013 because I kept reevaluating. I'm an analytical anal dude, bro. I kept reevaluating this. And the thing that I kept doing, which was a huge mistake, was trying to equate it to another aesthetic.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's good.
And it took some conversations with a lot of great minds where they said, man, just tell a story. Tell your story. And I understand what you're going through with that, because man, it's like we're not floating in totally uncharted waters, because there've been a lot of great composers of our heritage who have come before us. But in terms of that level of reach and exposure, that's a whole nother thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And that's where, if there's anything that I can impart upon you guys, is like, you know, Dave was talking about growing up in the church. Well, you got to operate on faith. You know what I mean? You have to operate on faith, knowing that what you're doing is going to reach somebody. Because when Karen Slack and those guys perform our opera here in New Orleans, there's this one guy, this elderly Black man. He was 70 years old. I'll never forget him as long as I live, because he didn't look like a guy that would go and see opera. You hear me? But when he listened to them people sing and perform, he grabbed my hand and he said, if this is opera, I will come.
Mm.
And it made me realize that all of us, all of you guys, this entire roundtable is a roundtable full of new adventures in uncharted waters for the public to experience. And we have to be vigilant, you know, and moving this thing forward, because it can't be just a few of us. There's a whole breadth of expressions within our community that haven't been tapped. And I'm glad to see that you guys have that burning desire to stick with this, because it ain't easy, you know, and that's what most people need to understand.
I have a question to piggyback on that. Wondering what everyone's relationship to classical music is at this moment, because I think what you're speaking to is a very, for me, a tense relationship, in which it's a genre in which I have to leave an integral part of myself at the door. That if I bring Blackness into it, the question is this still classical music?
Can I just, I know other people want to jump in, but I want to talk about that, because let me tell you something. Dude, I've had so many experiences where I've brought pieces to orchestras and they've had problems playing the pieces, right? And I'm sitting there saying to myself, okay, do I really call you out on this? Or do I try to make this work, right? And it was another composer, man, his brother that lives in Boston. He said, man, write. You need to write. You need to write. My composition teacher wrote a piece called Requiem for Louis Armstrong. And they were playing it in the Baton Rouge Symphony, right? And when he was coming back from a rehearsal, the concert master said, hey, man, some of those rhythms you've written are just kind of impossible. And he said, well, that's interesting, because there's little kids who play those rhythms in the French Quarter every day.
Right.
So at a certain level, we have to be true to who we are. I don't like the idea of us, turning that off to be acceptable in another world. You know what I mean? Whereas I think people are fearful of being uncovered for what it is they've claimed they've been able to accomplish, but not really be able to perform or experience. You know what I mean? So if I were telling you anything, Karen is my witness. You know, she's my witness. We just go for it.
Yeah.
We go for it. And the creative, the beautiful thing about it, you guys already have a network because you guys know each other more than I feel like I'm the newcomer to this group, right? But you guys already know who's out there and who's available to perform your pieces, who has the ability to do it.
But
you know what I mean?
but really, do you guys know? Like, do you feel like you know, have this relationship with these other, not just singers, but instrumentalists? And
I mean, you definitely have to get to a certain level before you feel like you actually have people who can like play your stuff or have your back and things like that. Because before that, it's just like, I wonder who's going to be able to do this. You know what I mean? And I mean, for me, so a couple things. One, I'm so happy to hear that everybody says that they have this sort of imposter syndrome, because anytime I start something new, I'm 100% sure that I do not know what I'm doing. It always turns out fine, but I'm always like a little bit timid about that. And the other thing is that, you know, like I said, I'm like a half singer, half composer. I've always been a composer. I have a lot of pieces under my belt, but it wasn't until I wrote an African American Requiem that I felt like I needed everybody to know that I was a composer, because this was a part of me that I needed to express, and I wanted to share that out to the world. What was the question? Classical music. What is my relationship with classical music? So, I mean, I grew up with classical music. I grew up in a very musical household, just like I'm sure pretty much everybody else. I mean, my parents were not classical musicians, but we had records. We had Beethoven records. We had Tchaikovsky records. So, I mean, ever since I was teeny tiny, I grew up with classical music. And I really love classical music. So I feel like my relationship with classical music is pretty strong, I guess. And the thing that I love about composing is that, I think, was it Ricky Ian Gordon who said that Ned Rorem said, "We write the music that we want to hear." And that's exactly what it is, because I love classical music. I love being Black. And if I can put those two things together, I mean, it's just like the perfect recipe for me.
I was going to say, it wasn't, so I grew up, like, again, like many of you, strictly classical. Like, I can't do jazz, just strictly classical. But it wasn't until graduate school where I had this question. I said, what does it mean to be a composer? I want to expand what it meant to be a composer. And to me, that journey began with exploring the music of my mother, who's African-American, and exploring the music of my father, who's Nigerian. Okay, that's how I got into the spirituals, right? To really, I said, you know, because my mom's African-American, so you have to go way back to the spirituals. My dad's Nigerian, so I got on a plane, I got a research grant and studied the music of the Ishan people, which is a small tribal group in southern Nigeria. And I got to like learn African drumming. And so that, you know, began the process of really expanding what it meant to be a composer, a classical composer. In many ways, I think they could be wedded. I love your answer, you know, Damien. You know, I love counterpoint. I study Bach. I use his techniques, but it didn't sound like Bach, right? It sounds like this Nigerian African-American, I don't know what I'm doing, right? I love Charles Ives, and I can, you know, dissect what I can get from Charles Ives, who's obviously an American composer too, but it's Charles Ives, but myself, you know, in that. But I had to expand what it really meant to be a composer. And one last quick anecdote. I should probably say this, but I was at an SCI conference, okay? I probably shouldn't say this, but which is the Science Composers Incorporated. And we, it was in New Mexico, and we had a nice discussion about why they're not minorities at this conference. And then people had some good answers, and I finally said, well, you have to change what it means to be a contemporary classical composer. I said, I submitted a piece that I knew would get accepted to this conference. I love the piece a lot, but it sounds just like everyone's piece here. I said, there are other pieces that I like that I think is just as well crafted. They're good pieces, but it probably wouldn't have gotten accepted because it doesn't fit that contemporary classical mold, which again, you talk about white spaces, Joel, it all connects. They received it well, so that's why I feel good telling the story. But that's what's going to have to change to really explore, to really redefine what contemporary classical music is, which includes us.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. I mean, when you say this word, this phrase, contemporary classical music, which of course is something that we have to say in order to define the current moment, but nobody really knows what it means, which is exciting. Joel, I mean, what I felt like as far as your question is really, classical music, my relationship to classical music has been completely and totally upended as well. So I think I know where your question is coming from. But the thing to, I think, remind ourselves about is the fact that we, Black people, have been in, for lack of a better word, integrated into the classical music history and practice forever, for centuries, right? Centuries upon centuries. It's been happening, right? So it's the desire to communicate some art, right? That you happen to be, I happen to be brought up in that tradition for what it's worth in terms of growing, in terms of how it happened in my time period, right? Which was through the New York track, right? Of violin, Suzuki, conservatory, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. But, I think as composers, we have, like, our job is to look at sound, right? To sort of figure out what is the essence, what is the sort of like, what are the tools and what is the function of this music? And I think, I mean, for me, classical music is starting to just have more of a sort of like coming to it in terms of color and sort of what are the particular elements that make orchestral and work as for an orchestra in a giant hall versus a smaller ensemble in a different kind of space versus a singer in a recital hall versus all, and the ways in which sound travels in that space, and the specific concerns of those things that we've studied about color and about phrasing and about emotional build throughout, these sort of really long form works, right? That's what we concern ourselves with. But I just think start just taking the elemental, like, musical parts of what makes classical music interesting to you as a form. And then allowing whatever else that needs to come into that also as part of a toolkit and part of an aesthetic, part of a thing that you observe and want to recreate in some way. And it's been nice to sort of disassociate myself. That's my defense mechanism maybe at this point, to disassociate from the white space of it all right now, and just say, well, I obviously have a knowledge of this music. I don't want to denounce my training. I have a lot of, but it's been a lot. It's been like a lot of like looking at, when you write something and saying, oh, I don't know if people are going to like that because it sounds too this, that doesn't fit in the language of a horn solo or whatever, it doesn't, anyway, and sort of, questioning my own attitudes about that, because I for those of us who did grow up in that world of the classical music, snobbery, for lack of a better word, but we were taught that it's better, right? The classical music is more advanced, more sophisticated. The tones that you create are the richest, best tones of the instrument. In some cases, yeah, there's been a lot of exploration in terms of, again, like carry of sound, getting a little technical, but it's allowing yourself to say, you know what, that hierarchy issue is not, that's something that needs to be completely X'd out of consciousness. And unfortunately, even as, you know, as we're Black composers having to, you know, standing in this role and in this place in classical music world, we have to also address the ways in which we've been sort of brainwashed with everyone else, and say, I mean, that's been my big hurdle right now, and it's fun to kind of.
Jump in here. I kind of want to piggyback off of what you just said, Jessie. I think our uncomfortability in classical music comes from, well, obviously not seeing us, first of all. Generally, anyone that has studied music or music in any form, the first people you see are white men. The first people you're taught about are white men. The timeline of music that you're taught is European. You start with the Middle Ages, then it's Renaissance, then it's Baroque, then it's classical, then it's Romantic, then it's 20th century. But all of these are European standards, and all these are European timelines. So if we're told of European timelines and we're educated with this, then what do we look like trying to recreate what they have done, per se? And it's absurd in the fact to think that there were not Black people in Europe when these forms of art were being formed. It's absurd to think that a lot of these white men that don't even like us, that would have hated that we were playing their music, is what we strive for, is what we say, this is high art, this is fine art. And you know, my relationship right now with classical music, I'm debunking what I've been told is European, and this is beautiful, and this is beautiful music, and this is how it should be done. I mean, me personally, especially as a vocalist, I'm kind of doubling into another question that was asked too. I think it was Terence, I think you said that, you know, knowing people that will perform our music. I've been fortunate, because I'm a singer, to know singers to perform my music. So if that makes sense, or to know instrumentalists to perform our music. In the same token, I've been fortunate for that space, but most of the time when I indulge in that, I'm trying to make sure that I create music that reflects my experience, my personal experience. And I think that's why when I get this writer's block, and then I'm like, oh, but I'm creating classical music in this white space, it's like, how do you inject yourself into what someone said is already not yours? So it's just, anyways, yeah, I've been fortunate. I've decided though, as a singer, at a young artist program, actually, that I wanted to solely just do composition. It was then that I was like, you know what? I think I'm tired of trying to fit into white spaces. It was like this, because I knew that composition meant that I'm writing the music that would be performed, and I have to perform music that was already written for me. So it was this kind of like navigating between the two spaces that made me actually want to write even more. Anyways, yeah, that's my relationship though with classical music now.
Can I just piggyback off of that? I'll just tell you, the liberating thing for me was Stravinsky. And the reason why I say that is because I was traveling around the world, and I was in Hungary when I was in my early 20s playing with Art Blakey. And I'd already studied classical music. I love all types of music. And I saw this kid on the street playing a recorder, playing some Hungarian folk song. And I said, that sounds like Stravinsky. And when I realized how much this guy was bringing folklore into what it was he was doing, it freed me, because I kept saying, I got it. Okay, I understand that we study these techniques, but we do that to just pick apart and see how things are built and constructed. But the thing that I try to work with my students is I tell them none of your ideas are wrong. There's nothing wrong with anything that you're conceiving. Let me show you how to take that kernel of an idea and build it into something much bigger. I don't go at it from a point of view of, let's study this piece. Because I know they get that already. They've been doing that for a number of years. My thing is to delve into their soul, to figure out rhythmically, what is it that you're feeling? Harmonically, what is it that you're feeling melodically? And let's take those things and develop those ideas and possibly come up with something that's a little different, but totally you. Mm-hmm. You know, because like all of you are saying the same thing, just like what Karen was talking about from the perspective of being a performer. We get into this world and we're told not to be who we are.
Right.
You know what I mean? And it's a frustrating thing because my father studied opera. My father wanted to be a singer, and all of the black men in my church, they would all get together every Wednesday night, man, and run through these arias and run through these pieces. And that's my orientation of seeing these proud black men who love this music, but brought their church background to singing that music, you know? And I see nothing wrong with us forging ahead with our background in terms of where we come from, not a background in terms of what we studied, because we're bringing both things together, right? But bringing our background in terms of where we come from to that world to bring something new to it, because it's been struggling for the longest time. How many times can we do La Boheme? I love La Boheme, one of my favorite operas. I love it to death. But man, I know that dude is tired. He's like, man, can y'all do some other shit? Give me a break. Can we just hear something else, please? You know what I mean? And I know all of you guys have the wherewithal to create that, you know? So when I had that experience with Stravinsky, man, it opened up a whole nother world for me, because I felt like, well, if this dude can bring his heritage to this music, why the hell not can I bring mine?
Right.
Well, he also didn't, I mean, he also uses a lot of like black music, jazz elements too. So he brought he brought our thing.
Well, there's a whole bunch of them that did that.
A lot of them use that.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of them that did that. That list is really, really long. About how they came back and stole harmony and so.
Nailah, so quiet.
I know, it's like, are you still there? Yeah, when I write, like, I don't really think about, I can't think about the label, like, where does this fit? I just have to write, like, whatever is honest to me. And it's like, what I write is the totality of my musical experience. So as a pianist, it's the totality of everything that I've studied and things I'm interested in, you know, like jazz. And I, you know, infuse my interest in my music, and whatever it's called, I'm really not concerned with that. That's outside of me. I know you have to put it somewhere. You have to put it somewhere. But I can't think about that. I just have to write what I write, and then I'll find a place for it. I don't think about like the label or where my music fits.
I have another question piggybacking off that. Wondering about being, Shawn had mentioned earlier, like being the website views went up and people are approaching us a little bit more now. I'm curious to see what people think about being approached to infuse our creations with a particular part of the spectrum of the Black experience, being the trauma of it, rather than the love and the joy and the sort of lighter things. Just what have been your experiences when you've been asked to actually bring your Blackness to your creation, and specifically that spectrum?
Joe, I'm glad you brought that up, because I was actually going to ask you that, low key.
That's why I ask it, so you don't ask me.
I mean, not to be ratchet, but like, you know, is there going to be like a 7 Last Words part 2?
No, never.
Okay, all right. Well, yeah. I mean, because really, my question, for you with that, because you have like, everybody's, we're all doing great things. And just want to just get down to 7 last words. Like that piece in particular is like one whole, cantata situation, evolving, circumstantially from, specific events. How did, you can answer your own question. How did you feel about, because I was going to ask you anyways.
So the circumstances leading up to the creation of that work, I was a choral conductor. I did not call myself a composer. I wrote it just to process my own feelings and put it away. I had a bad experience at a music festival and I thought that I couldn't compose. And so it just became a hobby, a little, thing for me. So Eric Garner, we all saw him die on YouTube, on repeat, on TV. And I was broken. The response, my automatic response was, if I were in that similar situation, my family shouldn't expect justice. And so I turned to this art form that I had training in, I suppose, and used it as a way to provide catharsis for myself, to focus on the men as human beings rather than subhumans as the media had portrayed them in order to justify their deaths. And so this piece, of the taking the last words of these men, using the template of the 7 last words of Christ, which humanizes Christ to me, was a way for me to focus on their humanity and properly mourn them and sort of take the pain out of my body, look at it, put it down on the table and walk away. And Freddie Gray died the following April, and then I put a call out on Facebook and I said, anyone want to sight read this work? And I got some friends together, we sight read it, and one of them called Dr. Rogers, and then at University of Michigan, and he premiered it the following November. And so I was put in a situation in which my most vulnerable, most honest, most raw diary entry had an opportunity to be put onto a stage. And I definitely, Dr. Rogers had to wait a week for me to make that decision. But I went ahead with it, and then that was sort of opus 1. And I've been continually asked this question of, do I write more? Which is an indictment on the state of our society right now. Yeah. That would even be a question. That being said, I know there's so much more to who we are as Black people. I've been really glad to work on Snowy Day that Kieran's going to perform in the fall, and that's allowed me to look at the world through a lens of wonder rather than fear, through a child's eyes, and that's been really healing, especially in this current climate. But I'm more curious about what all of you, my distinguished peers and colleagues, what your relationship to bringing this wide spectrum of Blackness, trauma, and joy, what that looks like in your works and in your future works.
I think that, so it's a balance, right? Because right now I'm torn between what are the stories that need to be told, and some of them are traumatic. For example, Tulsa. A lot of people didn't know about Tulsa. Karen and I have talked a little bit about maybe doing something to commemorate that event. So there are stories that I feel in history that people just don't know about, and I would like to use my voice to sort of bring light to these events. I got a commission to do a short opera, and I knew that I did not want to do anything that revolved around humans that have been enslaved. One, because that story has been told a lot, and 2, I'm thinking about the performer, like the performance side of me. I don't want to play another slave on the stage. And so what are those? I mean, it's a balance. What are those stories that are more joyful and talk about and just celebrate Black life? But right now, I'm sort of in this mind frame of, this is a story that needs to be told. This is a story that needs to be told. And until everybody knows about it, I'm just going to write these stories and I'll do the other stuff later. But that's just.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's a great question, man. I love it. I'm a naturally a joyful person, a happy person. But through my music, it's funny, most of the joy of the Black experience comes from when I incorporate either East African music or West African music. And so it's almost like I have to leave this country
Tell me about it.
to bring the joy back. Because I don't know how many of y'all have been to Africa, any part of Africa. I know, but you can't not go there and not just feel joyful. And so that comes back. That comes through through my music. When I do the work that I've done with the spirituals, though, I try to bring the joy out in some of those works. Believe it or not, the hope, the joy. It's hard because it was literally born out of one of the worst times, probably the worst time in our history when the Africans were enslaved. But there's some joy. There's some joy in the hope in that music, and I try to incorporate that in my work.
Well, I was going to bring up, especially for Ms. LaSlack, because I know you're working more in administration. It's kind of like the chasm of what we do, what people want to see and hear, and what administrators believe that people want to see and hear. It's interesting, as a Black composer, having to have that approach where we believe that and our audience wants to see this type of story from you, but I can't put Love Jones, into an opera or Waiting to Exhale the opera. It's that kind of tango I feel that we have to play. It's like, I believe if I write this audience will want to see it, but can I get this administration to support this to see that, or do they want me to write this for that?
Right, but then they don't even understand that the story is the story. It can be any race or any, those kind of stories. Yeah, but they don't even know. Well, parents can talk about Champion, for instance.
Yeah, but that's just because people are narrow-minded, and you always have to bring them to the table. With Champion, the thought was that it was a boxing opera, and they didn't know if they wanted to do a boxing opera, and I'm like, no, boxing is the backdrop to this. It's an opera about redemption in my mind. And really, in my career, I'm not really tasked with that in that way, because I'm always doing it kind of on my own anyway. When Eric Garner, I'm kind of like you, Joel, I had put together an electric band because I just wanted to inspire some young kids to play on a high level, right? So, I put together this band of like really incredible musicians, and we were going to do this music. And when we were in Europe touring, man, that's when all hell was breaking loose. Mike Brown, the list was just endless, of all of these young people of color losing their life. And I just felt like, just as a human being on the planet, I couldn't avoid that in my art. There was no way I was going to come back and write happy music while all of this was going on, So with that first album, we called it Breathless, and we did this whole album, which was centered around I Can't Breathe and Black Lives Matter, and then we did a follow-up album, which was Live. It was called Live because what we did was we went to 3 cities that had tragedies. We went to Dallas, we went to Cleveland, we went to Minneapolis, and we recorded live. We also had civic engagement in all 3 cities where we tried to bring in some civic leaders to sit down and talk about these issues. It was interesting when we got to Dallas because we invited the police to be a part of the discussion, and I thought they were going to be there because they had a Black police chief, but they decided not to attend the thing, which is okay, fine. But in Cleveland, I had an experience with a gentleman who came to the show, and it empowered me in a way that I wasn't expecting, because, to Dave's point, we all want to write music that really can help us heal our souls. We're always trying to find that, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean somebody's going to write us a check for that, right? You know what I mean? So I get that. But this guy came up to me and he empowered me to keep moving forward, because I'll never forget it. He said, man, he said, I came to your show expecting to hear music from A Tale of God's Will, which is the documentary thing about Katrina, and a very different type of music. And he said, but this music you were playing, it sounded so angry. you know. And then he said, when you in the middle of the show, you introduced the band and you told us what the music was about. And then he said, well, my next thought was, well, if the guy who created that music is this angry about what's going on, I need to rethink my position on gun control. And that empowered me in a way, because that's the power of art. You know what I mean? That's the power that we can hold in our hands by telling our truth. And that's always the balancing act in this business, because Dave's right. You know, in order to get your stuff produced, you have to go to these administrations. You know, you have to try to figure out a way to get these things, you know, but Karen knows, along with my wife and some other people, they're really great at framing, you know, these things for people to understand. Like when we did Charles Blow's book, Fire Shut Up in My Bones, you know, we had to frame it in such a way where people could understand really where we were coming from with this story, because it is a universal story. And I think that's part of the issue that we run into, is that when we trying to tell our stories, some of these administrations think, to Karen's point, it's a limited viewership.
Right.
Not realizing that, no, we're human beings, you know what I mean? And our truths, you know, resonate around the world just like anybody else's. You know, our pain is no different than anybody else's, you know? So that's why for me, man, I'm always caught between this rock and a hard place of, there's some things that come across my plate I just can't do. I'm sorry. I can't, because I don't feel it. And I always think to myself, and there's been some lucrative things that have come across my table where I just couldn't bring myself to do it, because I couldn't live with myself afterwards, you know, because I got into music to help me heal as a person. I didn't get into music to become a star or become famous or anything like that. You know what I mean? And I think when you operate from that mindset, you're dealing with your truth, which is honest and can resonate in a lot of other souls, you know? And I think that's what we have to keep on the forefront of our minds while we're still trying to navigate this other thing of gaining wider exposure and having people experience what it is that we do, because what you guys are doing is worthy of a lot of people to experience. But we have to break down that idea of the limited reach that people will think that it has, because it's not true.
Right.
Well, the first time I wrote music that responded to the time we're living in was actually with Karen. You know, that was the first time. And it's important. I'm so glad to have been a part of that, because music like documents certain times in history. You know what I mean? You could look at the songs that were written and you could find out what was going on, what was the climate at the time, what was the temperature of the country. So I think music is really important in like laying those things out, you know? So that was the first time I really wrote something that responded to a movement, a moment. Another time, you know, I just wrote a suite, but it was an instrumental suite based on the African drumming circle that used to be in the park across from my house that's no longer there now. But, you know, so I would incorporate elements of the area, but you would have to be from the area to kind of know what I'm doing.
I think for me, the first, I would say, okay, so I wrote a song cycle called Songs for the African Violet, and it's about Black women, if that wasn't clear. But so the reason why I wrote it was because I just got tired as a Black woman of people saying, you know, the only adjectives to describe us is being strong or, you know, sassy, those kinds of things. And I kind of got tired of that as adjectives, and to write a piece that actually showed the delicacy of, in the femininity of Black women, something that kind of reflects just who, you know, for myself, what I personally feel I represent. And, you know, while we are strong, you know, the like, it's almost like an implication that we have to be strong because of the things that are handed to us or like given to us. But we can still handle that with femininity. And I feel like my music should reflect the beauty of the Black experience. of course, I still love to write about the times. But sometimes I feel as though writing about the times sometimes is writing to cater to white guilt. And I'm not necessarily looking for sympathy. When I'm writing anything that I feel resonates with me, I'm not looking for sympathy, but what I am looking for is a space to express that, to say, this is what I feel. Okay, I'm not saying, I want your sorries, because I don't, because that's not going to change anything. I want your action. And I think creating those dialogues around those kinds of pieces are so important, because it's like, it's not enough to host to put on a production that, discusses like, police brutality, or, discusses things. It doesn't talk about it. It's like, no, let's talk about it. Like, okay, you saying it? Let's talk about it now. Okay. That, and it was one other thing I was thinking about. I'll come back to it.
Quick side note.
I'm sorry.
Oh,
Interesting thing that you just said, I forgot to tell you guys, one of the reasons how Champion came about was, like I told you, they initially asked me to write a composition about Katrina. I wasn't really feeling that. But I've been a big boxing fan all my life, and my best friend was a heavyweight champion, right? And he told me the story of Emil Griffith, right? And I'll never forget it. It happened with me. I was at an award show, and when they called my name for the award, the first thing I did was to turn around and kiss my wife and give her a hug and share the moment with her, without even thinking about it. It wasn't something it was just a reflex. And what got me about Emil's story was this guy became the welterweight champion of the world and couldn't celebrate that openly with somebody he loved. And that bothered me, you know what I mean? Because I'm sitting here saying, first of all, it's none of our business who he loves. That's his right, and that's his decision. So I had to create a piece of art based on something that had a serious effect on me. And as a result, Champion came about and allowed us to talk about this. It allowed us to bring it up in discussions. It allowed us to go all over the place and hopefully help other people deal with the issue, So that's why I'm saying, I love the fact that you wrote the piece about women, because you're right. That's always the thing we hear about Black women in all of these pieces, even in film. I get tired of it in film. I get tired of seeing the same characters, And the thing about it is, we know as people who grew up in this world that there's so many other stories to be told, And to Joel's point earlier, it's not always about pain and suffering. We love and we have great moments just like anybody else. I'm sorry, I just want to bring that back up. Sorry, Dave.
It was just not frivolous, but Jasmine, quick side note, Thumbtack. This song cycle about Black women, is it available for purchase? Download?
It is on my website. My website is JasmineBarnesComposer.com.
Okay.
I'm
gonna take Dave around with me so he can help promote my stuff too.
I'm an NBA marketing. I'm about to NBA marketing. Hey.
Jasmine, I had a thought about one thing you said about, that you don't want to write pieces in order to appease white guilt, in order to, somehow soften the blow for white people during this, and I completely, I feel what you're saying in the sense that, at this moment, I feel there's a lot of people that are reaching out. We're talking about people reaching out more than normal or more than usual. And and a lot of the requests being immediately, what is it that you want to say about this right now? And I think there's some confusion about, well, the story should come from Black voices, and so let me ask the first Black person that I know
cute Black person
to write this piece about it, about how I'm feeling. It's tough, it's hard, because and then to feel I would like to take this as an opportunity, but it has to Mr. Blanchard, like you were saying, like has to
Mr.
feel. I'm sorry, I couldn't help it.
Mr.
Popped out of my mouth. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay.
Yeah, I just yeah, I think it's important to recognize that's just so important for you to feel that you're connected to the actual story, that it's not, if that's not what the story that you're trying to tell at that moment, you're not doing it for them, you know, you're doing it, we're telling our stories for us.
Right.
But let me ask you guys something. This is something I've been struggling with just as a person, you know, because I definitely understand what you're talking about, Jasmine. I feel it and I understand it. But since George Floyd, I've had so many friends who have finally kind of opened their eyes. And I'm torn dealing with it, because part of me, it's like, here we go again. You know, we're about to go through the same scenario, the same process that we always go through in these situations. But there's something about this with at least some of my friends that feels different. And I hate the fact that I have to revisit these issues that we've been screaming about.
Right.
You know, for the longest time.
Yes.
Because people are ready to hear it now.
Mm-hmm.
So I get what you're saying, Jessie, but I struggle. I go back and forth. So do I take the moment to really delve into it, or just should I not? I guess is the question.
I always personally take it, because, well, obviously, you know, it's great for us to now have more people like, you know, viewing our music and listening and, you know, talking to us and wanting to have these conversations. But I feel like sometimes people have to understand when we might not be ready to talk about it. And it could just be traumatic for us to talk about it.
And I'm tired of like comforting you. It's like I have to comfort you to feel like not bad. Like, you know, it's okay. I know you're not racist. I know. I don't want to comfort you. You know, it's like you didn't go through anything, right? So not only are we tired of explaining, but we have to also make them feel better for feeling a certain way. By the way, that happens to our music too. Yeah.
I think we should also note that this awakening of white conscience probably occurred because we were in the middle of a pandemic. There's no way to escape it. There's no way to swerve your attention to something else. You're stuck inside your homes.
Yes.
Buildings are on fire, and now the safest thing is our music, perhaps. And that's frustrating, but we're also grateful as artists for people engaging in our work. But I was recently reading an essay by Audre Lorde titled "The Master's Tools Can't Dismantle the Master's House," and that's had me thinking. I mean, it was focused on Black feminism and sort of the exclusion from the current wave of feminism that she was in, but taking that same template or paradigm and putting it on our present moment. As classical musicians, are we working with the master's tools? And I mean, can we use it to dismantle the master's house? This is back to my first question. What does bringing our full selves to our music making look like? Is that working with different tools? Can that dismantle the master's house? These are the questions that are bouncing around my head.
You know what's interesting about that?
So many people are like,
I struggle. I shouldn't say I struggle. It's not. I don't struggle. When I started working in film, right? When I got to LA, I met some, like, you know, I wrote an op-ed about this whole thing, you know, about well-meaning people just hearing the melody and not knowing the words. You know what I mean? So when I got to LA, man, one of the things that I fought for, I told a contractor, I said, her name was Sandy DeCrescent. She's sweet as she wanted to be, a really nice person. But I said, Sandy, I love you, but I can't walk out there in front of an all-white orchestra. I just can't do it, you know? So they started contracting other people. And now those people, whenever I go out to LA, maybe they only work when I'm there, I don't know. You know, I hope it's not like that. But there have been a number of people who have been working in LA, and that goes to that point I was talking about earlier about finding people who can play our music.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And the thing that it got me to thinking about was there are a number of orchestras around this country made up of people from other ethnic backgrounds that don't get no light because we keep trying to go to the established thing to find validation.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Mm.
And I think part of what you're talking about, Joe, is the recognition of that there are these other groups of people out here who are really doing great work, who we as composers need to kind of partner with to kind of create our own situation.
Yep.
I was gonna say one thing that I tell like a lot of my students and mentees or proteges is that the great thing about their age now is that we're living in and they're coming up in an age where they have access to virtually anyone at any time. You could literally reach 1 million people at one time just by putting up Instagram posts, a Facebook post, a YouTube post. Like the young man who was on, was it the Kids, Amazing Kids, who sung the song, Please Don't Kill Us,
Yes.
and Barack Obama's, reposting it, Michelle Obama's reposting it. You have that kind of access. Of course, with that kind of power becomes responsibility, but with that, and we do have the opportunity now to build our own audience and cultivation rather than having to go through, snail mail, telegrams, gatekeepers. I'm gonna meet you here, we're gonna meet there, auditions, all of this. We have access now. For better, for worse. Is whether we love it or we hate it, we love the internet, hate it, love YouTube, hate it, it's there. Yeah. So it just depends on how we use that tool, I believe.
You don't find that those same systems are just facsimiles of the larger world, that the same gatekeeping that takes place in the real world also takes place in that virtual space?
It does.
Well,
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, but you can, but I do, only because like I said, I love marketing, I love business technology. I mean, but you can build your own, your own audience. I mean, that's something that, I do, I love to do. Like, reason why I came on, a little bit earlier, a smidge before, to kind of, traffic people through. And like I said, I love business. So, but yeah, I mean, so it's, kind of, using that to our advantage. But I do understand what you're saying about the gatekeepers.
Hey, Joel, I think you're right. I think a lot of those people still are the gatekeepers of the internet. The difference is that we do have the possibility of having more access. The reality is we don't have the marketing dollars that they have to go out there and put out those millions of posts, those blasts that go everywhere to reach a lot of folks, because I have seen artists, at least in the jazz world, I know some artists, man, that have been able to build their brand through that, but it's with a dedicated fan base, and again, it's that differing thing of that dedicated fan base versus that establishment thing that can immediately say, okay, this guy is valid in their eyes because you become a part of that. That still exists, and that's a hard thing to break into and break down. The thing that I say, and it was interesting, man, because oddly enough, I heard this I heard Jay-Z say something in an interview that I thought it struck me, because he was talking about how he's the famous one, but he grew up with a bunch of guys that were much more talented than him, and that people who really had something to say. Their music just didn't reach a wide audience. And it hit me because, that spoke to me as you know, my career being a jazz musician. In my entire life, people, and I know you guys probably get the same thing. Don't you want to, Shawn, don't you think you could? Why don't you try to, you know? And my answer is always, I can't. I just can't. You know, nothing wrong with that because I love that, you know, music. I love all different types of music. But for me, I'm very comfortable with what's going on in my career. And as a result, I think you allow yourself to create music that can be far-reaching beyond your own perspective, you know, because it's honest. You know what I mean? And I think that's the thing that I try to take away from all of this, man. Is like, you know, you got to walk in your truth, whatever that is. You have to walk in that. You have to create your music based on what that is, you know, and because we're all different. And the thing that I love about looking at this roundtable, you know, obviously in certain situations, people will look at all of us as being Black composers, you know what I mean? And I know that's what we're here talking about, but that's not what I see. You know what I mean? I'm seeing all of these different personalities that make me very inquisitive about your creations because of the personalities, right? And that's what we have to hold on to, because that's the most important thing about all of this. And to your point again about this whole gatekeeper thing, one of the things that I'll say, man, and I know I don't have to say this to you, but I'm saying this to mostly the people in the public who are watching this, is that you have to be strong-willed to be in this game. You know what I mean? You have to have a certain type of makeup to allow yourself to realize you have worth in this game. No matter if it's 2 people at your show or it's 20,000, doesn't matter, because you're creating stuff that's going to go well beyond our tiny existence on this planet. You know what I mean? And we have to constantly keep that in the forefront of our minds, because the industry itself makes us desire the things that don't really apply to us as artists. It applies to us as in the material world, you know, success, money, fame, and all of that stuff. You know, that's a whole separate thing, you know, but artistry is something totally different, you know, and I love seeing you guys, you know, have this discussion, because, you know, it's a valid discussion. It's a very important one for us to have.
I guess I have a question. What would it look like if we did not use the master's tools? Like, what would that world look like?
Exactly what I was thinking, Damien.
Well, go ahead. I'll let y'all talk.
So what was the question? Sorry. What was the question?
So Joel, you know, posed the question, are we using the master's tools to sort of
Until the master's house.
Exactly. So what would it look like to not do that? What does that look like?
Or
Well, I
to
think
steal the master's tools, and or just
Say again?
or to freely steal them and steal the master's tools.
Right.
You know, whatever. And so I'm sorry, Damien. I totally interrupted, but I was.
No, go.
That metaphor, just like, yeah, I just want to flip the metaphor around and also say, what if we stop viewing ourselves, as artists, we have, yes, there's this gatekeeping issue that we are going to have to address as time goes on. As artists, we have to be able to say, to take ourselves out of the submissive role in that situation. Who is our master now?
Yeah.
Do we have masters? We're not slaves anymore to this master, right? We don't have to live in that anymore. And there is that bigger issue that we're trying to address, that it seems like people are trying to address more physically in the real world, and in terms of how we get past those places. But I think in our consciousness and our way that we create, it's so important that we do not look at that as something we're trying to, grab hold of, or that we view ourselves in that as a submissive player in that.
I should clarify that the metaphor in the original Audre Lorde essay was trying to emphasize that within feminism, one should embrace differences, that the differences among the women striving for equality is the strength. And she was struggling against this concept of white feminism, excluding poor people, Black people, lesbians, women identifying women. And so the master's tools were specifically related to racism rearing its ugly head within the world of the struggle for feminist equality, or just equality for women. But I think what not using the master's tools would be like Terence said, being really honest about who we are, bringing our full selves into the space, trying not to filter who we are to appease any of, I mean, there are gatekeepers we can't deny, but what would it look like if we were our full selves within this realm that we love? I think what keeps me in classical music is my true, sincere, soul deep love of the music. But I also like hearing Jasmine record every part of Take 6 songs and break it down and, and play it on repeat on Facebook, all the, like there's so much that's a part of who we are as Black musicians that I think we can bring into this space. And I think for me, that's what, not using the master's tools looks like.
I also think while we are entering these spaces, we also need to be cognizant of building our own, because, for as many white opera companies, there are Black opera companies. It's just, where are we donating our time? Where are we giving our energy? What kind of support are we giving to these organizations that already exist, like Harlem Opera or like Trilogy, or like the list of these spaces for us, by us, they exist. But I've heard my own people refer to some Black spaces as like the Chitlin Circuit, or just different things like that, where people don't view it as like as good as, and I just don't think that's the case. I just think we, as in equal spaces, we can offer ourselves. It's just that one, it's almost like we're seeking acceptance, and the other, we're seeking validity for the entire event. And I think really it can be navigated by us equally. I really just think, we have the things. We just, because I personally recently was like, I want to start my own blah blah blah, and I just reacting off of emotion, and truthfully, honestly, people checked me quite quick and was like, that already exists. Okay, so stop like thinking you have to create it when it already is there for you. Just adhere your time and give a piece of yourself to it, and see where that takes it. Because we are the community that will build that up. We are the people that they will seek out to make sure that their name is. I want Harlem Theater to be as big as the Met. That's what I want. You know what I mean? These are the things that I'm thinking about. But yeah,
I do think it's like a major problem for us collectively. Like I don't think we value our own things. I think we're looking for outside acceptance. Like when I think about the Oscars, I'm like, well, we do have our own award shows. Like, how come we don't value that? It's a real, problem to overcome, where we don't value our own things and we're always looking outside for acceptance. So.
And even with like awards, it's that double indemnity. It's like, we had to take so much longer and further to get there. But when we get there, it's like, well,
ooh, the one person got it.
Yeah.
What's been funny, what's been hilarious is that, I had a movie that was just released earlier this month.
What's it called?
Yeah, I saw it last night.
The Five Bloods.
Okay. Yeah.
So I've been doing all of these interviews, man, and in the interviews, a lot of the folks who asked me, they said, so what was it like being nominated for an Oscar? I said, well, it was cool. But it wasn't something I'd have ever really, it never happened, so I wasn't looking for it to ever happen. You know what I mean? It wasn't on my agenda, It's still not on my agenda. I don't do this for awards. This is not, I think people get it twisted. You know what I mean? And don't get me wrong, man. I had a great time at all of the events. You know, I had a great time watching my wife like find all of the dresses for all of the events. That shit was fun to watch. You know what I mean? But you know, the whole idea of it for me was cool, but that's not my motivation for doing anything. That's not why I'm here. That's, you know, and I think we have to keep that, you know, in perspective, not for us, but for the people who are coming to hear what it is that we do, you know, because like what Joel said, you know, he loves this music just like we do. We all have a passion for this stuff. You know, I think about my father, man, all the time. Those guys would sing anywhere. Anywhere. You know, they would go to the convent, do a concert there. They would go to an old folks home, do concerts there. You know, and they were part of a group that was called the B Sharps, right? And the B Sharps, yeah, it was a group in the 70s, man. And what the B Sharps was about, it was all about promoting classical music in the Black community in New Orleans. And they did everything in their power to perform and put on their own productions of things, and they raised their own money. You know what I mean? And it was in the realm of what was happening back then. It was pretty successful, you know. But this goes to what we were talking about earlier. How do we get our own work? That was them taking charge, taking control of their own situation, and not waiting for a handout.
Absolutely. And it's one of the things that I love about composing is that I feel like we can really create our own opportunities. Of course, that, you know, sometimes we might need a little bit of help, but I think that so often and this has already been said before, we're like begging people to accept us, or we're trying to, what's the thing Louis Farrakhan said? He said, why are we waiting around for people to do for us what we can do for ourselves?
Right. We have to Karen sing our music. Yeah.
Yes. Give it to me.
Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I've just gotten to the point, and maybe I'm a little bit older, I don't know, but this whole idea of just creating your own opportunities, like as a singer, I got tired of doing auditions and nailing those auditions and knowing I did well and still like not booking anything. And I'm like, I'm tired of waiting for people to like accept me. No. And also, I would much rather have an NAACP Image Award than an Oscar.
What'd you say, Nailah?
A lot of people don't feel that way. You know,
right.
We don't appreciate, maybe not anybody in this chat, but you know, collectively, I feel we don't appreciate our own things.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Acceptance from outside is so important.
Yeah.
You know, and it's
Because
it's a twofold issue though, because even with the NAACP awards, we got to get them to appreciate what you do.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? So that's the other side of the coin, you know, because what's been happening in our community when it comes to that kind of level of experience in terms of television and pop culture, you know what I mean? We've been excluded from that, you know, and we shouldn't be, because we weren't in the past. But for some reason, you know, nowadays when it comes to pop culture, what it means to be Black doesn't fall in our category. You know what I mean? And that shouldn't be the case, because Leontine Price was heralded as one of the, you know, premier voices of her time. You know what I mean? And a lot of that had to do with us propping our own people up, understanding what we were giving to the world, you know? So I think we have to call that side out as well, you know, in terms of, you know, appreciating who we are and the breadth of who we are as a people.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why I would rather have that award, is because I feel like it would be a thing that says, okay, yes, we accept you, and this is what you do, and that's cool. So come on this way.
Sure.
Yeah, but I just want to emphasize again, like, I can't remember who said it. We have our own people that are world class, that are the best in all instruments. In fact, I almost feel like a fraud as a composer. I really do. Because people are like, oh, Shawn, your music's so great, but like, they kind of made it great. These performers, and they're Black, right? And so it's like I can write anything, and that'll just make it sound good. But yeah, I think that's a very special thing. You know, we have our people. We do. Obviously, we don't want to just write for our people. But if we have to, we have to, and it'll be just as good.
Well, that's why I feel fortunate, man. I feel very blessed to being able to do the productions that I've done, because, man, I'm gonna tell you, I got to one of those first rehearsals that I attended, and man, you know, I had written this cluster of harmony for these vocalists, man, and when these women were just sitting there, they were just chatting away and like doing the girlfriend thing. Hey, girl, good to see you. Man, and when it came time to sing, they were awesome. I mean, like, just incredible. And it just blew me away. And I got emotional because I was so proud. I was like, wow, that's what I'm talking about. And then it just carried over throughout the entire production. And Karen knows this because we always joke about this. We'd go out to eat, man, and all of a sudden they start singing pop tunes in 4-part harmony. You know, and people were sitting there going, man, who are these people? You know what I mean? I'm like, these are some very trained operatic voices that you're right now, you know? And I just loved it. I loved the entire experience because I was walking around like beaming like a proud papa, watching. Karen was too, because she was keeping people in line. Don't walk away from your truth. No, but it
didn't go like that. It didn't go down like that. But
okay. But it was great, man. It was great to see, because the other part of it was, man, they opened up the eyes of a lot of other people who didn't really give them the shine that they deserved. You know what I mean? Because they brought the goods. Given the opportunity, they brought the goods. You know, even down to the little boy who was there, man. He was he was 7, 9 years old.
Yeah. 7 or 8, yeah.
It was an incredible experience to see, you know, and the thing that I love about it is that other people got to see. And hopefully, you know, it's a tip of an iceberg of people saying, hey, man, you know what? So-and-so is a really great singer. Why don't we think about them for this other production? You know, it's just one of those things we just have to. That's why I was talking about earlier about the dilemma of not wanting to be a Black composer to do only Black stories in film, but in opera, I feel like it's totally the opposite. You know, where there's a need to create these roles for these beautiful voices to experience what it is they do.
Well, I have a question.
No, I was just gonna say real quick, if you don't mind, really to Damien and Karen, actually that the Met Porgy Bess was one of the most glorious song productions I've ever seen. I wish I could have been there in the house. First of all, congratulations to you all about that.
Yes.
But when I heard, I was like, man, these are literally the best singers in the world.
Right.
Love to hear them in Don Giovanni. Can we get a Don Carlo? Can somebody, you know, can I compose something? You know, please hire me to compose.
Yes.
You know, I mean, because, you know, we got the gift. We got it in space. It's just, you know.
I was there in the audience, man. I was blown away. Blown away. It was amazing. I loved it.
Well, Terence and I had a conversation about, sorry, Dame. Terence and I had a conversation, I think it was either before we went to Fire, it was maybe in New Orleans at your house. And I was like, you have to keep writing. You have to keep writing. And he was like, oh man, you know, I don't know. And I was like,
Ain't my world.
You have to keep writing because it gives us opportunities to be employed, but to also, you know, to sing our things outside of what they allow us to sing when it's Black music. You know what I mean? And we have to have opportunities to sing great music. That's why I was like, I want to sing all of you guys' music, because not just because you're Black composers, but because I want to put my instrument on your notes, you know what I mean? Like, and to have that freedom of it being new and also to create Black art in a way, you know? And it's important because we don't get those opportunities, because they'll, like I say, they'll commission 25 new 25 new operas, and 23 of them will be all white casts. And then you get one shot to get it right, and then that's it. And that just it's not fair. The numbers are not.
Well, that was the thing that was interesting about watching Porgy and Bess for me, because, you know, I was there to meet Peter Gill because, you know, they want to do Fire Shut Up in My Bones at the Met, obviously. And I was honored to be there. But the thing that struck me while I was listening to it was, I went, wow, okay, this is a great piece, but man, between that and then my piece, there's got to be a whole bunch of pieces in between.
Right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's what I was curious about. I was curious about, well, what are these other things that, you know, we haven't heard on this stage? You know what I mean? Because I was appreciative of seeing you guys up there doing that production and seeing all of those beautiful voices. But I kept thinking, okay, that's great, you know, but I know there's other work out there that can highlight your voices in a totally different way.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a question, and this might step on some toes, but like, how do you all, talking about telling stories, how do you all feel about white composers writing for telling Black stories? And I guess I'm talking about more today. Porgy and Bess, of course, is a wonderful example of that. But like, what are your thoughts on that? Because it's something that I've been thinking about. I'm not going to say the name of anything, but what are your thoughts about that?
I'll share my experience on it. So I didn't say this before, but I went to Morgan State University for my bachelor's and my master's, actually. So I personally have quite a bit of experience with Porgy and Bess, being that Morgan's choir was the first choir that performed Porgy and Bess, period. So that's like my relation with that. And I remember that being one of the first operas I ever performed, my first role being Serena. And so it was, for me, my spaces in that was like, almost like grateful that it existed for us to have an opera of our own, but it wasn't really our own. And we don't really benefit from it, except for the fact that people get to hear our glorious voices all together on a stage. I think for me, I think that white composers writing for Black singers, while I'm not opposed to it, I think when we're telling a story that presents a narrative of Black people, I think it should come from Black people. Like, for instance, Porgy and Bess, I mean, in my studies of composition in general, I realized Porgy and Bess sounds uniquely similar to Afro-American Symphony by William Grant Still. It sounds uniquely similar. It could be because of the time periods. It could be because of that, but I'm 100% sure that it was a reflection of the fact that, you know, this music existed really because of Black people. This infusion of jazz into the classical realm, and creating this different, it's really almost a different genre, but it really is within the same place. You know, that came from Black composers, but the exposure that William Grant Still received in comparison to George Gershwin, I think was extremely disproportionate. And I think sometimes when we have white composers writing for Black voices, especially in a storytelling situation, it's almost unfair because we know it's going to receive more traction than we like. It's just, history has told that white composers that write for Black voices get more recognition than Black composers that write for ourselves. It's almost like an exotic thing when someone else approaches what our own person experiences. I mean, the research that George Gershwin did about Porgy and Bess, for instance, could have just been an easy thing for a Black composer because it's our experience. Whereas he had to go research and find out, what does it sound like to be in a Black church? What do Black people care about in their community? What does a Black community look like? What kind of like relationships would they form? And, you know, those kinds of things, we know that already. And I think it's so important for us to be able to tell that story from our perspective instead of this, you know, fearful, you know, like fear, like, you know, the narratives that exist in Porgy and Bess. You know, we know what exists there. Not much of it is centered around success for Black people, or, you know, or anything that's really progressive for Black people. So it's like, I just think Black composers telling that story, I think is super important. I'm not opposed to white composers telling it, but I in a way I am, in a way.
Yeah, I think context matters too. Like I'm grateful actually for Porking Your Best because it's a great work of art, but I don't think that could happen now. I don't think a white guy can say, I have this amazing opera about the Black experience, and it will take off. It could be the exact same opera because fortunately we're being recognized more. I can say this is also women composers too. Women composers. I mean, in many ways, I mean, they've really been doing it and been ignored. You know, but now it's like no. You know, this is a different time, so we can tell our own story. You know, we could have back then too, but you know, fine. I'll forgive that. But I really believe if that cannot happen today, because we have people that can do it, and that's something. While we still have a long ways to go, but I'm actually hopeful about.
Well, I'm gonna tell you, my experience, my perception of this may be a little different from everybody else's. I think we have this reaction to this question because obviously of the lack of representation of our composers. You know what I mean? And I think that is the thing that causes us to say that, because for me, I don't want to be relegated to just writing stories about us. I want to be able to write stories about everybody from my own vantage point. And I think, and I'm just saying theoretically, I don't have a problem with anybody writing stories for us because it's all about intention. What is your intent? How is the story being told? It's okay for me, it's okay if you're not well versed in the culture, if that is a part of the production. If you're not trying to make commentary on the culture, that's the issue for me. When you're trying to make commentary on something that you have no experience about, that's when I have a problem. I have a huge problem with that because it's showing a high level of disrespect. Right. You know, so by the same token, I don't want somebody telling me, hey man, you can't do this story because you're African American. You know what I mean? So right. My answer probably is a reaction to a utopic world where all things would be equal. And we know that's not where we're living. But I try to be like Martin Luther King and try to espouse to the best ideals of who we are as a people, and not try to allow somebody else's ignorance, you know, or somebody else's lack of experience, you know, have such an effect on my opinion that I start acting the way they do, you know. So I understand where you're coming from, because my knee-jerk reaction is to have the same reaction, you know what I mean? Because we're not getting the opportunities. It's because we have this conversation in film. We have the same conversation in film all the time. It's like, you know, no, I don't have a problem with white directors making film about Black people, as long as there are more Black directors making films. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? The problem is like, you know, it's a false equivalency because we're making this argument because we know that there's a lack of representation in the business.
Yeah.
I think we're also involved in these, in order to tell these stories, we're referring to collaborative arts like opera. And so I think it's essential, though, that if a white composer wants to tell a Black story, that there are people on the creative team who can speak to that lived experience. So at least the librettist can be Black, and at least the director can be Black. Right. You know, there's ways to make compromise happen so that there is that context that we're referring to. I see that all of you are performer composers, and there's this I think within the Black community, we prize versatility as virtuosity almost, in that you're able to do it all, I suppose. Do you find that people look at one corner of your musicianship and say that because you have multiple ways of expressing yourself as a performer or composer, that you're not seen as particularly devoted to one of those crafts? I'm just curious.
I'm gonna mute myself on that one.
Go ahead.
I think that I think and I hope that that's just not going to be a concern going forward, that we'll start to shift our understanding of what a musician is and what a musician does. What does a musician do? A musician creates music. How do they create music? They either create it by composing the music, or sometimes they perform the music. Sometimes they create the music that they perform. Sometimes they perform music that somebody else created. It's about sort of just reframing this idea that a composer is one thing and a performer is something else, is something that sort of came down the pipe in the past, right? Like around in the 20th century. Yeah. And that's, I think that's starting to shift back to what the tradition of classical music is, which is that that we're all just musicians, we're all like composers and jazz musicians and performers, and we just decide, so people, the classical musicians have looked down sometimes on jazz musicians, right? For being like, just for improvising, and like that's this weird thing that they do, right? But improvising is something that composers have to do, and that, Beethoven improvised. He didn't just like pull ba 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 out of his head, and then you have to figure out the rest.
Yeah.
You have to know how to integrate performing into your best case scenario, I think.
I'm not gonna lie. I'm kind of envious of all of y'all. I really am just a composer. Like, I'm an academic and a composer, so I don't perform at all.
Don't tell that lie. You play low brass. Don't tell that.
No. I really just a composer. So anyways, I'm really envious. I wish I could just like throw down singing or on the piano or even low brass. I mean, I'm competent in many of these things, but I feel only really competent in composition, but I'm great. That's why I'm so grateful for performers, so.
But I think the thing is you put it in the frame of your music is going to be performed by someone.
Right.
So having that understanding is part of the dialogue and part of the, world that we're sort of living in and working in, so.
Yeah, I think it's also natural for people to want to hurry up and put you in a box, a category. So they want to know, are you this or are you that? And you could be many things. You could be multiple things at the same time. I think it's people just want to hurry up and say, okay, you're only a composer, or you're just a performer, or whatever, rather than you could be many things. Yeah. So.
All right, we are at the 2-hour mark, and I just want, any last words? I'm gonna let y'all continue to have the floor.
I just have one last word. When my goal as an educator is to make sure that, because I teach performing artists, so my goal is to make sure that they feel that there are no lines between genres, that they embrace jazz as a high art or fine art the same way they embrace classical music as a fine art, or R&B. Like one of my coworkers talked about Beethoven, Basie, or Beyonce. Why can't those all be equally viewed as successful and as good music, or as educated music? So that's my goal, to make sure we make space for the next generation.
There's a lot of amazing composers and arrangers writing for R&B artists right now that are singing good.
What?
Tiny Desk is my resource for that these days.
Yes.
Fun deep dive,
I want to give you all the opportunity to say something before we
I'm just proud to be a part of this roundtable of these brilliant minds. You know, I think, you know, it's a beautiful thing to see. And again, like I said at the start, I want to thank you, Karen, for putting this together. Not only for us to kind of sit here and just like talk, but to put this out for the public to see who these people are, you know, from all different walks of life who have something to say. Thank you.
You're very welcome. And
Thank
there are
you.
administrators on here, and there are people who share this, who can write a check, who can commission every single one of these people, and then have to be this year, next year, 22, 23. People need work. Okay.
So can we do a quick website check, IG check?
Yeah, say your. I want everybody to tell you, give your website and all your.
Joel has done that already. He hooked us up in the comments.
Oh, okay, right, exactly. Yeah. So anyway, please follow these people, like these people, support these wonderful artists. Cut a check so they can write some stuff for me, okay? Every single one of them. But I appreciate you all, and stay in touch with each other because I know you guys will.
Absolutely.
Yes, sure. I'm gonna be checking everybody out.
Pleasure to meet those of you I haven't met and to see those of you I know. And
yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. And this was like the most this is very popular conversation. But anyway, all right. We're gonna leave you here.
All right.
Thank you, Karen.
Godspeed. You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
Bye.